sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
All right, let's jump right in. Today we're doing a deep dive into MLK Day 2025.
Yeah, sounds good.
Our main source, a really interesting article from FOX5 Atlanta. It's going to be fascinating to see how they're celebrating this year, what it means for all of us now in 2025.
Definitely. It's more than just looking back, right? We can really get a feel for how relevant Dr. King's message still is, especially with everything going on these days.
You're so right. Speaking of what's going on, that theme they have, Mission Possible, protecting freedom, justice, and democracy in the spirit of Nonviolence 365. It feels so relevant, almost urgent.
Absolutely. Like a reminder that what Dr. King fought for, it's just as important now as it was back then.
For sure. So they're holding the main event, the big commemorative service at Atlanta's historic Ebenezer Baptist Church. I know it's connected to Dr. King, but how close?
Oh, it's a deep connection, like generations deep. Dr. King's grandfather and father led the church, and even Dr. King himself was a co-pastor there. Holding the service at Ebenezer, it's incredibly symbolic.
It really connects the event to the history, to the roots of these issues. But it's not just a local thing, is it?
Nope, not at all. Anyone can watch it. They're broadcasting it live on the FOX local app, fox5atlanta.com. You can even catch it on YouTube and Facebook.
That's great. Makes it accessible for everyone. Oh, and they've got Deidre Dukes from FOX5 Atlanta hosting the broadcast.
Yeah, she's great.
Now, I have to say, the keynote speaker, Bishop William J. Barber II, I'm really intrigued. I know he's an activist, but what else makes him the right choice for this event?
Well, his dedication to social justice, it started young. Like 15 years old, he was already the president of his NAACP Youth Council, and then at 17, he became the first student body president of his newly integrated school. Talk about leadership and passion for equality. Right?
Wow, that's amazing. It's like he was destined to follow in Dr. King's footsteps.
Yeah, in a way. He's leading the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. It's like an echo of Dr. King's 1968 campaign.
Interesting. So are they focusing on the same issues, or has it evolved since 68?
Definitely evolved. They're addressing poverty and economic injustice, like Dr. King's campaign, but they've broadened it. Now it includes things like healthcare, the environment, even militarism.
So it's a more interconnected approach, recognizing that these issues are all linked together.
Exactly. And it makes you think, if Dr. King were alive today, would he be leading a campaign like this?
That is a really interesting question. So it's more than just a continuation. It's like an evolution of his ideas.
Right. But one thing that's definitely the same is Bishop Barber's commitment to nonviolence. Just like Dr. King, he's got this history of peaceful protests, advocating for civil rights, healthcare, and a lot of times it leads to him getting arrested.
Wow. Putting himself on the line like that. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And it's not just protests, is it? He has other important roles, right?
Right. He's walking the walk, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, professor at Yale, and he leads an organization called Repairers of the Breach. He's really putting Dr. King's vision into action.
Makes you appreciate his choice as the keynote speaker even more. But before we go any further, we should probably talk about the bigger picture, the meaning of MLK Day itself. It's easy to forget how much work went into getting us here.
It's true. We take these holidays for granted, but MLK Day isn't just about celebrating his birthday. It's about making us think about racism, civil rights, all of that.
Yeah, I know the basics, but what are some things people might not know, like controversies or lesser-known facts about the holiday?
Well, the fight for MLK Day was long and hard. It started in '68, right after Dr. King was killed, but it faced a lot of opposition. Took 15 years just for it to get a vote in the House.
Seriously? So people were openly against honoring him?
It was a lot of things. Some thought a national holiday was too expensive, didn't see the need. But yeah, some of it was definitely straight up racism.
Yep.
Like downplaying what Dr. King did or being against the whole idea of honoring a Black civil rights leader.
So it reflected the racism and inequality that was still a huge problem back then.
Exactly. So the fight wasn't just about Dr. King himself. It was about recognizing that we still had a long way to go in terms of racial equality.
Wow. And then even when it finally got a vote in '83, it only passed by 5 votes.
Yeah. Just 5 votes decided whether or not to honor one of the most important figures in American history. Crazy, right?
That's wild.
Yeah.
It really shows you how hard it is to make progress sometimes.
It does. And it didn't stop there. Even after it became a federal holiday, some states still refused to recognize it.
Really? Which states? And why would they do that?
Arizona was a big one. The governor actually canceled MLK Day as soon as he took office. It caused huge protests and boycotts.
Wow, what a statement. Did it work?
Nope, totally backfired. Big entertainers refused to perform there. Organizations moved their conventions. Even the NFL moved the Super Bowl from Arizona to California.
No way. So they basically forced the state to change its mind by hitting them in the wallet.
It's crazy how money can sometimes drive social change when morals don't, right?
Yeah, it's complicated for sure.
But in the end, in '92, the people of Arizona voted to bring MLK Day back. But it wasn't until 2000 that every state in the U.S. recognized it. Utah was the last one.
So it took over 30 years to fully recognize MLK Day. That says a lot about how challenging social progress can be.
It does, but it also shows how powerful persistent activism can be, and how important it is to face the good and bad parts of our history.
And that we can't take anything for granted. The fight for equality never really ends, does it?
Nope.
We have to keep pushing for justice and fairness for everyone.
Exactly. It's a legacy we all share.
Speaking of legacy, I'm curious about Atlanta's role in Dr. King's life.
Yeah.
The article talks about his deep connection to the city. But what was it about Atlanta that made him the activist he was?
Well, it wasn't just where he lived. It was where his family's story began, their faith, their involvement in social justice. Like, the article goes all the way back to his great-grandfather joining the Shiloh Baptist Church in 1846, over 100 years before Dr. King was even born.
Wow, that's amazing. It sounds like the city's a part of him.
Yeah, it really is. And Ebenezer Baptist Church, where they're having the service this year, it's a big part of that story. Dr. King's grandfather was the pastor there, and the church stayed important to the family for generations. His father was the pastor too, and Dr. King himself co-pastored with him.
So it wasn't just a church, it was like the heart of their community and their activism.
Exactly. It's where they grew their faith, connected with others, and found their voices for social change.
Were there other places in Atlanta that were important to him?
Oh, yeah. The article talks about the schools in Atlanta, too. Dr. King's grandmother went to Spelman Seminary, and Dr. King himself, he started at Morehouse College when he was only 15.
15, he was just a kid.
Yeah, he was brilliant. And those are both historically Black institutions, so he was surrounded by people who understood the challenges and hopes of Black Americans.
So he had this amazing mix of intellectual growth and social awareness all in one place.
Right, and as he became more well-known, Atlanta became like the center of the civil rights movement. It changed, became a thriving place for Black Americans. It's a great example of how a city can become a symbol of progress and change.
Absolutely. And that legacy continues, right? Huh. The article mentioned the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park and the King Center, places where people can learn about his life and work.
Definitely. They're not just tourist spots. They're like living reminders of his legacy, you know. They help us remember the power of nonviolent resistance and that the fight for social justice is still going on.
It's like the whole city is a memorial to him and his message.
Yeah, in a way.
But we can't forget the tragic part of his story, his assassination. It's hard to talk about, but it's an important part of understanding his impact.
You're right. It reminds us that even though he fought for peace and nonviolence, there were people who hated him and what he stood for. He was killed on April 4th, 1968, at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, a huge loss for the civil rights movement.
And there's still some mystery surrounding his death, right?
Yeah.
Like, the article mentions that his family doesn't believe it was as simple as it seemed.
Yeah, they think James Earl Ray, the guy who was convicted, didn't act alone. They believe the government was involved, and they even won a lawsuit against some government agencies because of it.
Wow. So there's still questions, even all these years later.
It shows that history is complicated, and the truth isn't always clear. But even with all the mystery and debate, Dr. King's message of nonviolence and social justice is just as strong today as it was back then.
It really is. His words still inspire people all over the world to fight for equality and stand up against injustice.
That's his true legacy.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
Let's take a quick pause.
Okay.
We'll be back soon to dive even deeper into MLK Day 2025 and explore how people are celebrating and honoring Dr. King's legacy this year. Stay with us.
We're back diving deeper into MLK Day 2025.
You know, talking about Dr. King's assassination and all the unanswered questions, it makes me think about Coretta Scott King. The article mentions her, but it feels like she played a huge part in keeping his work alive.
Oh, absolutely. She's often forgotten, but Coretta Scott King wasn't just there in the background. She was a powerful activist in her own right. She was really key to preserving Dr. King's legacy, making sure his work continued after he was gone.
So what were some of the big things she did? Like, did she just pick up where he left off?
In a lot of ways, yeah. She started the King Center in Atlanta, which we talked about earlier. But it wasn't just a memorial or a museum. She saw it as a center for action, for social justice, education, research. She wanted to make sure Dr. King's message wasn't silenced, that his dream would live on in a real, concrete way.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. So she had her own vision for how to keep his legacy going.
She did, and she wasn't afraid to be her own person. She spoke out for peace, economic justice, LGBTQ plus rights, even when people criticized her for it. She never gave up on fighting for justice, just like her husband.
It reminds you that behind every great person, there's often someone just as amazing working with them, sharing the load and the vision.
It's a partnership. And in their case, it went beyond Dr. King's life. Coretta Scott King made sure his work would keep going, reaching people for years to come.
It really makes you realize that Dr. King's legacy is about both of them, Martin and Coretta. They were both so committed to justice and equality.
Exactly. And her impact is still felt today. The King Center is a major voice for social change, continuing what she and her husband started.
Makes you want to learn more about her. Maybe we should do a deep dive into Coretta Scott King sometime. But for now, let's get back to the article. There's this part about how MLK Day became a holiday. It wasn't easy, was it?
No, not at all. It took years of activism, people pushing really hard to get it recognized as a federal holiday. The article lays out the whole story, all the ups and downs, the struggles, and the eventual win for those who fought for this day.
It's like a mini version of the civil rights movement itself, this long, difficult fight for recognition and equality. Tell me more. What were some of the key moments?
Okay, so it starts just 4 days after Dr. King is killed in 1968. Congressman John Conyers, he introduces a bill to make Dr. King's birthday a federal holiday. Seems like the natural thing to do, right? But right away, people are against it.
Really? Why? Was it just because he was black?
It was complicated. Some said it would cost too much or that we didn't need a holiday for everyone. But yeah, racism was definitely a big part of it. Some people just weren't ready to see a black man as a national hero.
It shows how much prejudice and inequality there still was back then.
Yeah, and that opposition stopped the bill for years. It took 15 years for it to even get a vote in the House, and it failed by just 5 votes.
5 votes? Seriously. That's so close. Imagine if just a few more people had voted yes.
Yeah. It's crazy to think about, right? But even though it didn't work that first time, people didn't give up on MLK Day. They kept pushing because they knew how important it was to honor Dr. King and acknowledge the fight for racial equality.
Didn't Stevie Wonder get involved?
Oh, yeah, he was a big part of it. In '81, he released that song, Happy Birthday, dedicated to Dr. King. It became like an anthem for the movement, bringing attention to the issue and getting people to support the holiday.
I love how music can be such a powerful force for change.
Yeah.
It really connects with people.
It does. And Stevie Wonder's song, it really did that. It made it hard for politicians to ignore MLK Day. That energy, combined with all the work activists and lawmakers were doing, it finally led to a breakthrough in '83.
So after 15 years, they finally passed the bill.
Yes. President Ronald Reagan signed it into law, making the third Monday of January Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It was a huge victory for everyone who had fought so hard.
But the fight wasn't over yet, right? Some states still didn't want to recognize it.
Yeah, you're right. Even though it was a federal holiday, it took a while for all 50 states to accept it.
What was the deal with those states? Why were they holding out? Was it just about the principle of the thing, or was there more to it?
Different states had different reasons. Some said it would be too expensive to add another paid holiday. Others worried about school schedules and businesses being disrupted. But a lot of the time, it came down to not wanting to fully admit the truth about racism in America.
It sounds like the same arguments people used against the civil rights movement in general.
Yeah, definitely some parallels there. It shows that progress isn't always straightforward. There are bumps along the way. But the movement for MLK Day kept growing, people's opinions changed, and those states that were resistant, they had to face their own history and accept the holiday.
It's a good reminder that even when things seem impossible, if you keep fighting for what's right, you can make a difference.
It's true. And that we shouldn't take our freedoms for granted. The fight for equality never ends. We always have to be ready to challenge injustice.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about Atlanta's role in Dr. King's life. We touched on this before, but I'd love to hear more about how the city shaped him.
Atlanta was more than just a place for Dr. King. It was where his family's story was rooted, their faith, their connection to social justice. The article does a great job of showing this, tracing it back to his great-grandfather joining Shiloh Baptist Church in 1846. That's over 100 years before Dr. King was born.
That's incredible. Like the city is part of his DNA.
Right. And Ebenezer's Baptist Church, where they're having the commemorative service, that's a big part of it too. Dr. King's grandfather was the pastor, then his father, and then Dr. King himself co-pastored there. It was so central to their lives.
It sounds like more than just a church, more like the heart of their community and their activism.
Absolutely. It's where they nurtured their faith, connected with people, and found their voices for social change.
It makes you wonder, what was it like for him starting college at 15?
Must have been pretty intense, but also amazing. Both Spelman and Morehouse are historically Black colleges, so he was surrounded by people who understood what it meant to be Black in America. They gave him the knowledge and the support to develop his ideas about social justice and equality.
So Atlanta gave him this perfect mix of intellectual challenge and social awareness, setting him on the path to becoming the leader we know him as today.
It's like the city itself helped him grow, giving him the experiences and support to find his voice and his vision for a better world.
And as he became more famous, Atlanta became a central point for the civil rights movement, didn't it?
Yeah, it became this hub of activity, a place where activists and organizers from all over came together. It really became a symbol of the movement, a place of hope for people fighting for equality.
And that legacy is still there, right? The article mentions the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park and the King Center, places you can go to connect with his story and learn about his impact.
Absolutely. Those places aren't just tourist attractions. They're like living reminders of his legacy. You can walk in his footsteps, see where he lived and worked, and where he ultimately gave his life for the cause of equality.
So in a way, the city itself is a kind of memorial to Dr. King and his message.
I think so.
But we can't forget the tragedy of his assassination. It's a tough subject, but it's crucial to understanding his legacy.
You're right. It's a stark reminder of the hate and violence that he dedicated his life to fighting against. Dr. King was murdered on April 4th, 1968, at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. It was a devastating loss for the entire civil rights movement.
And as we mentioned before, there are still a lot of questions about his death. His family doesn't believe James Earl Ray, the man who was convicted, acted alone. They think there was a bigger plot involving the government.
Yeah, they've done their own investigations, and they say there are inconsistencies in the official story, that important information was hidden.
So there are still unanswered questions all these years later.
It shows that history is complicated, and sometimes the truth is hard to find. But even with all the mystery and debate, Dr. King's message of nonviolence and social justice is just as powerful and relevant today as it ever was.
His words continue to inspire people all around the world to fight for equality and stand up against injustice.
That's his true legacy, isn't it?
All right, let's take another quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into the specific events happening this year for MLK Day 2025 and explore the different ways people are choosing to celebrate and honor Dr. King's legacy. Stay tuned. We're back, ready for the final part of our MLK Day 2025 deep dive. This has been pretty eye-opening, wouldn't you say?
It really has. We went way beyond just the basics, you know. We really got into the deeper meaning of Dr. King's legacy, the ongoing fight for social justice, and all the different ways people are remembering him today.
You know, as we wrap things up, I keep thinking about that theme for this year's big event, the commemorative service.
Right.
Mission Possible, protecting freedom, justice, and democracy in the spirit of Nonviolence 365.
It's powerful stuff, isn't it? Yeah, it really makes you think. It's like a call to action, you know?
Yeah.
Dr. King's message, it's not just for one day. It's something we should live by every single day.
Definitely. And having Bishop William J. Barber II as the keynote speaker, it just feels so right. He's dedicated his whole life to social justice. He's got that powerful voice, and he's totally committed to nonviolence. He's such an inspiration.
He really embodies what Dr. King stood for. His work with the Poor People's Campaign, it's like a direct link to Dr. King's own campaign back in '68. It shows that the fight for economic justice, it's not over.
It makes you realize that equality isn't just about having the same rights on paper. It's about making sure everyone has the chance to succeed, the resources they need.
Yeah, it's about tackling things like poverty, healthcare, the environment, all those things that hit marginalized communities the hardest.
It really makes you wonder, what would Dr. King be focused on if he was still here? Would he be fighting these same battles? Would he be doing things differently?
Who knows? But I bet he'd still be on the front lines, speaking out against injustice wherever he saw it. He might have different strategies, adapting to the times, but his core message, love, nonviolence, equality, that would never change.
And that message still resonates with people everywhere. It inspires them to get involved, to make their own communities better.
And that's what MLK Day should be about. Not just remembering Dr. King, but taking action ourselves. It's a day of service, a reminder that we all have to play our part in creating a more just and equitable world.
Speaking of service, the article mentioned the AmeriCorps website. It's a great place to find volunteer opportunities near you. Have you ever thought about volunteering?
I have. I think it's an awesome way to give back and honor Dr. King's spirit of service. The article mentioned some cool stuff like pet therapy for seniors, giving away prom dresses, music lessons for kids. So many options.
I really like the pet therapy idea. Bringing some joy to people who might be lonely. It's a small thing, but it can make a big difference.
It just shows that even small acts of kindness can have a huge impact. And that's what Dr. King was all about, right? Recognizing everyone's worth, treating each other with love and compassion.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into MLK Day 2025, I want to ask our listeners, how are you going to honor Dr. King's legacy this year? What will you do to help make that mission possible a reality?
It doesn't have to be some big dramatic thing. You could volunteer, donate to a good cause, even just talk to your friends and family about social justice.
Or even just think about Dr. King's teachings and try to live by them every day. Nonviolence, love, equality, those are things we can all strive for.
Every little bit counts, you know? It all adds up to create real change.
Remember Dr. King's dream, that dream of a more just and equal world. It's a dream we all share. It takes work, it takes commitment, but it's a dream worth fighting for.
Thanks for joining us for this MLK Day deep dive. I hope you learned something new, thought about things in a new way, and feel inspired to get involved and make a difference.
That's it for today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep working to make the world a better place. We'll see you next time.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll.